All right, today we are going to be jumping back into the Bitcoin price action. It's still the weekend. We got to take price action with a grain of salt right now. We are seeing a dump on price, but am I too worried about it? Not necessarily. Do we have a bearish trend? Absolutely. We want to see trend broken here. We want to see a reversal on price. The trend is your friend to the end of the trend, as I talked about in my last trading video. And currently we do have a very clean downtrend represented by these two descending channels. I really have never seen this before on Bitcoin, having this large of a channel so cleanly tapped with another channel within it. So this is real interesting to see here on the charts. Very easy to comprehend what is going on right now. You can see we are going ahead and actually testing the bottom side of this channel within the channel currently right now on price, and we did just get a very nice bounce, pixel perfect on that line that I had drawn. So real interesting to take note of this. Now there's nothing to say it's more probable to break to the upside or downside out of this channel, and there's nothing to say we can't break to the upside and reverse or break to the downside and reverse. But because we have been respecting these lines so cleanly, it's definitely something to take note of on the charts and just kind of watch. But let's go ahead and talk about what could actually be more likely to happen here rather than just looking at some cool patterns we're seeing. And the fact that we had this dump today is actually not a bad sign because, again, it's the weekend, it's Sunday, the traditional finance markets are not open, CME is not open, and if we look at CME, they closed at $64,320 on Friday, and that is higher than where price is currently right now. So you would expect when we open here that you're going to see a gap from 64,320 all the way down to wherever price, closes the day, probably, let's just assume it's at current price. You're going to have this big gap to the upside, and if you know anything about gaps, it is likely to go ahead and fill these, which could give us that move up to actually start breaking out of this trend. Maybe we get a back test after filling the gap, something like this, right? That's what we're all hoping for. But, these gaps aren't a guarantee, and we could easily just kind of, fill 50% of it, something like that, and then head on down and actually continue the bearish trend. But as I've been saying in all my videos recently, the most amount of liquidity is still to the upside. And assuming the stock market continues up, we see the S&P continue to break into new all-time highs or even just start distribution but maintain the current price right now, I do believe market makers are going to find it pretty easy to go ahead and push up price here on Bitcoin, and I do still expect that $75,000 level to be tapped even in a bearish scenario. I think Wyckoff upthrust after distribution is very likely to see here, and what you're looking at now is those liquidity maps on a 1-year time frame. This is the highest time frame we've looked at on the channel so far, so you guys can get a grasp of where we are when we're looking all the way back down at our bear market lows at below the $30,000 level, and you can see we have higher liquidity up above us until we do get down to that kind of like $25,000 level. And that's why it just makes more sense to me, even in a bearish scenario, we go ahead, grab this liquidity to the upside. You do see we have a little bit more below us, right? We have some around $63,000, but we have a pretty big gap before we get down to $60,000. So this is what I'm going to be watching for. If we are able to hold, this liquidity zone, $63,000-ish, and bounce from there, starting trend reversal, I think it's likely that we're going to go ahead and see a short squeeze all the way up to those all-time highs. They're going to take out that topside liquidity, and that's where potential top could come in for Bitcoin. If we do start getting down to the $60,000 level, down in here in these liquidity zones, I do believe there's a possibility we do start going lower because liquidity maps are kind of like a magnet. You will magnet towards the highest amount of liquidity, and once you start getting down here, you might start magneting down to this $50,000 level, and once you're at the $50,000 level, well, now you got a lot of resistance to get through to get back up to this high liquidity node, and it will be probable at that point that this was in fact your high on Bitcoin, and there is no secondary high, there's no secondary burst of euphoria. That was it. It was kind of a failed bull market. There was no expansion into altcoins, and that's due to the Federal Reserve having interest rates high, and because smart money knows we're entering the Great Depression 2.0 soon here after the S&P finishes off the blow off top. So I got to throw that bearish scenario out there just so we can kind of understand what's going on here. But even if it were like worst case scenario and that does play out, these trends right here are not going to get respected this easily, and I do not believe shorts are just going to get away with shorting every single level within here. No, I mean, we even saw back all the way in 2021 when we made that secondary high. You can see during this downtrend here, like we squeezed up quite a bit to break this trend. You can see somewhat of a similar pattern happening here if we were to just pull kind of like a downward sloping channel. Obviously it's not as clean, it hasn't had as many taps on it, but you do see a break to the upside and then a failed back test of this thing as support, and your warning sign for this breaking was the amount of times we tapped this uptrend. So we have some pretty interesting stuff. Nothing's guaranteed, right? History doesn't repeat, it rhymes. But if we were to get something similar where we go ahead, break out to the upside here, and then we start tapping this a bunch of times, the more times we start tapping this uptrend, this is going to start concerning me, right? What I would much rather prefer is we go ahead, grab these lows, right? Let's do one more scare wick to the bottom because these are some poor lows in here. They're not the cleanest. Let's go ahead, scare everybody out of the market, and then let's go ahead and start coming up here with haste. We don't want to see any momentum being lost on this uptrend. We just want to go for those shorts. This is a potential level to be watching out for. This is a potential level to be watching out for. This is a potential level to be watching out for, right? These are your imbalances in the chart. I think no matter what, we're going to be squeezing up to those levels, and what we want to see is them carry through. We don't want to see them act as resistance. We just want to see price continue on up, flipping all of this stuff into support and squeezing all the way up to $75,000. And this can happen very quickly. And in this scenario, I do believe altcoin season will be starting during this next uptrend on Bitcoin. But yeah, each of these lines right here are big levels to be watching out for in a bearish scenario, right? I don't believe we're just going to crash right now. I don't think any of these shorts are going to get away with it, at least not these bottom shorters within here, because we saw on the order flow in my last video talking about the Bitcoin price action that a lot of shorts were opened in this area right here from Binance, and they have not been correct in the market so far, so I do not believe they're suddenly just going to get away with bottom shorting. We can see using the levels chart, these are your big levels of resistance. One is right here, and we actually looked at this when I was doing my trading series video yesterday, is that we had a lot of volume confluence for this level along with those imbalances. So I would be watching out for 65, 700, around that area within this kind of vector candle fair value gap. If we can go ahead and get through that, flip it as support, I think the sky's the limit as far as where price is going to go. I think we're probably just going to go to 75K, but if we cannot get through this, this is a level to be watching for, right? If we do start back testing this trend like I was talking about a bunch of times, and we find resistance up at this level in here, that's your bear case. That's where, I get a little bit worried, and I don't want to stay biased on this channel if we do start going up there and rejecting that. But I'm certainly not going to be panic selling the lows because price is very likely to at least magnet up there, and we will probably get a burst of euphoria in the markets once trend does start reversing. But we also see some fair value gaps, some volume levels up those previous lines I had pulled earlier on the chart, and these are both levels to be watching out for. But, like we were talking about with liquidity zones, how they magnet, if we can get through this stuff, probably just going to magnet straight up to $75,000, and that's still my base case. Now, we had talked about Bitcoin dominance in my last video, how this falling down right here was a signal that the altcoin season may be starting, and I had said to confirm this, we wanted to get under the daily EMA. You can see clearly we have not gotten under. Let me actually turn this on so you can see the daily EMA. You can see we clearly did not get under this daily EMA and made just higher lows here on price, forming some sort of double bottom, coming up to test this trend one more time. And Bitcoin dominance is looking kind of bullish right now, so not exactly what we wanted to see here on the charts. I had posted in the Discord, Bitcoin dominance got a strength back. We wanted to see rejection at these fib levels. We did go ahead and see that rejection right here, and we went ahead, came back down. But now, currently on today's candle, we have been going on now flipping these fibs into support. So that's not the best sign so far, but we still haven't made a higher high. We still have this big trend above us, so there's a good chance that we just have one more flush on Bitcoin or just one more burst up here on Bitcoin dominance before rolling over, and it could already be topped out, right? Predicting Bitcoin dominance kind of impossible to do, but we will be watching this closely because what I had said is if Bitcoin dominance does not fall during this next rally, there are two options as I see it. Bitcoin is either going way higher, 100K plus. This is a scenario where Bitcoin just rips to the upside and outperforms all your altcoins, which would signal like, hey, we're going for a much higher distribution price. And that altcoin season is just going to happen later on when Bitcoin's at six figures. And that's kind of the best case scenario. Or it's the worst case scenario in that this is not a true bull market with expansion into risk on assets, like I had mentioned earlier in this video. And that's due to just macroeconomic events going on right now because unemployment, the interest rates are high. People don't have quite as much money as they did, especially during COVID when everybody had stimulus checks. So I'll make sure to continue watching this, keep you guys updated in the Discord, as well as continuing to watch these channels within here because I do think they're quite interesting, even if I don't like patterns all too much. Clearly, price has been respecting this stuff quite well. And finally, before we end off the video, let's talk about the single prints that I had mentioned in a previous video and how there was a good chance we go ahead and sweep this. These are some poor lows. Essentially, what makes a poor low is you don't have that tailing wick that goes through your low before firing off here, so there's inherently just more liquidity that gets built below it. Nothing says that these have to get swept, but because it was finding support in these single prints, a lot of times price likes to fill these single prints anyway, so don't be too surprised if we do come down here, grab that, right? This is the scenario I talked about. We go ahead, sweep that one more time before heading up here with haste. And also we still do have a lot of buyers that are still in the order books looking for that secondary sweep. So as long as we can hold these single prints, those inefficiencies in the chart from previous candles, and not get under this stuff, then my base case remains the same, and I'm not too worried about price action at all. I think we're going to squeeze on up to $75,000 like I've been talking about. Whether we do it right now or we go ahead and grab this first, I really don't expect us to break below the $63,000, 62.5-ish level. There's a lot of support down there as far as imbalances, some volume levels as well. So that's where I'll be looking to take my next long if we do get that sweep of liquidity. And it's certainly not the time to panic sell, because even if we are in distribution for Bitcoin historically, this is when you see the altcoin season start to fire off. And if we're not in distribution for Bitcoin, we could see Bitcoin dominance continue to rise as Bitcoin has its epic rally into six figures. And I think I'll leave off the video on that good note there. So if you have any questions about anything I talked about, link to my Discord is in the description down below. Also running an event right now with BingX, so make sure to go check that out too. And with that being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.